problems. We're trying to set up systems like this, financing systems, in China and India. China just replaced America this year as the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases. They now are burning more coal to generate electricity than the United States, Canada, Europe, and Japan combined. So I would say to all of you who care about this as a global environmental problem, this is one place where every time your city does something, you are helping to establish a level of confidence that will enable other people in other countries to do the same thing. You are helping to model the kind of behavior that your counterparts all around the world are going to have to emulate for us to have any chance to avoid the most calamitous consequences of climate change. So I thank you for that. Let me just mention one or two other things. I know the mayor of Austin talked about his experience with the utilities. There's a fascinating article which I urge you to read in today's New York Times Sunday magazine about Duke Power Company and its chairman, Jim Rogers, who is a partner of ours, in which he points out that if we can get, this is something you can lobby all your legislators for, that if we were to decouple electric rates from electric usage in every state in the country, and then require electric companies to generate power first through conservation before building new power plants, it would have a breathtaking effect. They could also put my building retrofit program out of business if they wanted to, which would make me very happy, because a utility could even do it better. But for example, if you just do smart metering, which would cut off all appliances not in use at peak hours. That is, you know, if you leave your TV plugged in, it's always generating electricity or using electricity even if it's not on. So if you had a smart meter that cut off any appliance not in use during peak hours, Rogers estimates that for Duke Power alone, that would save them 1,800 megawatts, which is the equivalent of 2 coal-fired power plants. Just that one thing. You could save more with peak pricing, where you charge more during the high-use hours of the day, and reward people for doing their washing after 9 o'clock at night. Furthermore, the utilities could do what we're now doing on building retrofits, and do it even better if you could decouple the rates from usage. And let me explain why. Suppose instead of the system that I just described to you, the utility that serves Mayor Nutter and Congressman Fattah in Philadelphia would send the people in, do the energy audits, and finance them. So you do the 13 municipal buildings, you cut the power use 30%, it costs whatever it costs. Instead of having a traditional bank loan that has to be paid off in a small number of years, a utility could treat that as if they had built a mini power plant and pay it off over 15 to 20 years. That means that instead of waiting for the bank loan to be paid off, the city would receive immediate savings, because they could say, okay, we're cutting your power use by 30%, but we're only going to give you 15% of the savings, but your bill will still go down 15%. So you could actually work it out so that there would be immediate savings if the utility is aggressively involved. And all of this is so much cheaper, as you heard today in the Austin example, than building new power plants. And so I cannot emphasize that enough. The other thing that I'd like to ask you to look at when you go home is this. The capacity of America to generate clean energy from landfills, from geothermal and solar and wind has been grossly understated in almost every single report. It assumes that the fundamental way things are is the way they have to be. And therefore they say, well, you can only get to this much wind or this much sun or this much the other thing. And I would just like to just make a couple of points about this. The Energy Department has a study which says enough wind blows from West Texas to the Canadian border with Montana and North Dakota to electrify America. But we're not going to do that, and we can't do it today because the transmission grid we have would have to be reworked, and it would cost $1 trillion or more. Sounds like a lot of money, but if we spent $600 billion in Iraq, if you did it over a decade, you could do a lot more. But if you look at, but if you look at your respective cities and the nearby areas, what you may find is that the wind blows hardest and most consistently in places where there aren't enough people to have justified a prior investment in transmission capacity that would allow the electricity the windmills could generate to be fed back into the grid to get to the people. Now, this is something, unless you have a municipal utility, you can't solve on your own, but your states could solve it, whatever federal policy is. And it would be worth it. Texas generates more electricity from wind than any other state, but I remember vividly a couple of months ago, I was standing on the back of a pickup truck right before the Texas primary in Del Rio and Eagle Pass, Texas, speaking to a few hundred people in both places, and the wind was blowing 56 miles an hour. Don't stand on the back of a pickup in cowboy boots in 56-mile-an-hour winds, at least if you're over a certain age. But the point is, there's not a windmill in sight. Why? Because these areas are sparsely populated, so the old energy economy would not have justified a transmission system sufficient to carry the electricity back to the grid. I saw the same thing in eastern Montana, in eastern Oregon, in the places that are less populated and less prosperous have the greatest capacity. So that's the other thing I would say. Do not accept the low estimates. And in terms of solar, it's largely a question of volume and how much we want to subsidize it. But I think it's very interesting that the largest producers of solar and wind today, users, not manufacturers, users, are both the same country, Germany. Germany is 1/5 our landmass. The sun in the entire country shines on average about like it does in London, 1/3 of the daylight hours. But the government policy shines. They have invested in tomorrow's energy and energy independence and generating jobs instead of yesterday's way of doing things. I'll never forget, I was in Ohio. It's interestingly enough, Ohio has a plant, as Mayor Pasquale will tell you, that is the largest single producer of solar panels in America. And while I was there, they announced they were going to open another plant. Not in China, not in Mexico, but in Germany, where the cost of operations are considerably higher. Why? Because of a policy decision that was made to go for tomorrow's energy instead of yesterday's. So we're now working. We have a whole solar energy section in my climate change initiative. We're looking to see if we can get some good volume discounts. But basically, as a rule of thumb, solar and wind energy both drop about 30% in price as you double usage. So the market is driving them. There are lots of opportunities here. I have a friend in New York State, Tom Golisano, who is made his money in sending out paychecks to people. But he has worked out a deal with 9 different townships where the municipalities will own their own wind energy and sell it back to the utilities. And unfortunately, there's quite a waiting list today for the windmills, in part, I think, because domestic production in America hasn't gotten very high because the Congress has not given us a long enough time period for the tax credit. If you knew it every couple of years, it's hard to justify the investment. I know Senator Reid told me this week they're trying to get 6 years this year. But that's another option. There are actually municipal governments in New York that as soon as we can get these windmills are going to start earning their own direct money by being in the energy business and selling it back to the utilities.